An emergency fund turns an emergency into an inconvenience.
An emergency is something that's completely unexpected, it's unavoidable, and it's urgent.
A lot of people get stuck because they put an emergency expense on a credit card and then they're paying 25-30% of that in interest for the next 6 months to a year. Welcome back to the Fiscal Clinician Podcast, where we empower healthcare professionals to build wealth, crush debt, and achieve financial independence. I'm Josh, financial coach and owner of Fiscal Clinician.
And I'm Devon McCord, your co-host and owner of Health and Wealth Hawaii. We are both physical therapists turned financial coaches, and we are on a mission to help healthcare professionals live a debt-free lifestyle.
Yeah, and today we're diving into something so vital is the emergency fund, because it's not a question of if you'll have an emergency, but a question of when. Whether your car breaks down, you have a health or family emergency, it's just going to happen. Job losses. And so let's start out with a few facts about emergency funds and emergencies in America. Devin, what do we got?
So studies from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau states the following: 24% have no savings set aside for emergencies, and 39% have less than 1 month of income saved for emergencies. So we're looking at the huge chunk of the American population.
Yeah, a quarter of Americans don't have any savings and 39% have less than 1 month. That's pretty wild. And there's another study from the Lending Tree survey, and 49% of US adults say they could not cover an $1,000 emergency expense if they had to use just cash they had or their checking account. So basically half of Americans. 93% of Americans reported they've faced a financial emergency at some point, 32% just in the past 6 months. And among those who had an emergency expense of $1,000 or more in the past 6 months, 55% went into debt to cover it, and 27% are still in debt from such an expense. So we see a theme of people going into debt, whether it's credit card debt, and paying sometimes 25-30% just because of an emergency that comes up. And that's what we want to prevent for you guys. Devin, why don't we start by talking about some times in our lives when we were grateful to have an emergency fund?
Yeah, sure thing. I could start off with a very interesting, funny little story here. So I was actually surfing at about 6 in the morning. I was stung by a jellyfish, and I've been stung by jellyfish before, but this time was a little different. I could literally feel the venom going through my bloodstream. I felt it pumping through my heart. It was like a sharp pain. And I was like, all right, I'm going to surf a little longer, then I'm going to get out of here. And I just couldn't surf anymore. So I was like, all right, I'm going in. So I went in and I told my buddy, I think I may be in anaphylactic shock. And so I told my buddy to just take me to the ER. So I went to the ER, basically was looking to see if I needed an EpiPen or something. And they said, okay, you can wait in our waiting room and we'll give you a hot pack and basically a vinegar patch. So I was feeling a lot better after that. And they said, I don't need the EpiPen. So I'm like, okay, thank you. Can I leave? They said, yes, but here's your bill. And the bill was $600 for that emergency room. And I was probably there for an hour. So this was definitely painful to my arm, but also painful to my pocket. But I'm super thankful I had an emergency fund. Without that, I don't know where I'd be. I also didn't panic because I did have some control over that unexpected financial burden. So I felt very relieved because I already had a budget and a plan in place, and that money set aside was for that unexpected event. And so overall, it went pretty well. I'm sure you have a good story too, Josh. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, definitely the most expensive hot pack and vinegar patch you've ever had, and $600 an hour,
Yeah.
man. Sometimes I feel like we're in the wrong business, but that's a whole other conversation.
For sure. 100%.
But yeah, there's several examples I can think of as far as when it comes to needing an emergency fund and just us being glad that we've had one. But the most prevalent one is one that's going on right now with the government shutdown. And at the time of this recording, my wife is active duty and we're not sure whether the next paycheck is going to come through or not. And someone once said, an emergency fund turns an emergency into an inconvenience. And we so feel this right now that although we might not even get our next paycheck, we have a little bit of cushion in our savings, and then we have our emergency fund. And so we absolutely feel that this is an inconvenience, but it's not forcing us to go into credit card debt. It really is more of an inconvenience. And that's the freedom and the peace we want you guys to have that comes with having an emergency fund.
Yeah, man, that's a perfect example right now of a government shutdown that was just totally unexpected, right? and you can't avoid it. And you do have to have some money saved aside in order to feel at ease with this uncertainty, right? Like we still just don't know when the government's going to turn itself back on. And we'd like to start off this podcast with defining what exactly is an emergency. And to us, an emergency is something that's completely unexpected, it's unavoidable, and it's urgent. And so when we think of examples for the emergency fund, we want you to think along the lines of an emergency travel, maybe someone sick and there's a death in the family, maybe a job loss, medical or dental emergencies. Other examples could be major car or home repairs. And these are things, again, that we want you to keep in mind when you are saving up for that emergency fund. The ones that we don't want you to think about are a part of an emergency fund are going to be examples of like vacations, major home renovations, like maybe a new deck, something like you may not need, routine maintenance for cars, like buying tires. This still should be kind of like things you're going to expect to happen, and non-essential purchases. So, buying a new surfboard for Devon is not going to happen. And it's easy to blur these lines, right? But we have to have a defined line of what is an emergency in order to start putting money towards it, developing a good behavior for it.
Yeah, and we want to be sensitive to everyone affected by the government shutdown. There's so many people who have been affected, and we're deeply and truly sorry that so many people have been furloughed, dealing with job loss. So, guys, if I know that the recording will be a little later, but if it's still ongoing and you guys are listening to this during the shutdown still, please feel free to reach out. We would love to give you some resources or help in any way we can, because we know this is affecting so many people. But Devin, thanks for just those definitions. I think another thing to note, because we can easily mix up emergencies and non-emergencies, or we can justify a lot of different things. I've done it myself too. And so I think it's very important to have that emergency fund in a different account compared to your checking account. It could be, we'll talk about different places to put it, but especially when you're just starting out, using a different savings account and not your checking account helps reduce your ability to spend your emergency fund money. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of the concept of friction in business. And so like Amazon, for example, their buy now button is an example of where there's almost no friction because you have to just push one button and then you've got the thing in your door a couple of days, right? But what you're doing by putting the emergency fund in a different savings account is you're adding friction to spend. So it helps basically with the decision of, is this truly an emergency or is this just something I'm wanting? And a lot of people say, well, I've got a credit card in case of emergency. That's my backup plan. And let's be clear, we're not against credit cards at Fiscal Clinician. In fact, my wife and I are probably going to go on a vacation here soon in January. And we're looking at like a hotel stay for 4 or 5 days that would be like around $2,000 or $2,200. And I'm booking it just through credit card points. And so I personally use credit cards. We take advantage of them. But what we are against is paying interest or carrying a balance on the credit card. And we'll talk more about all these things in a completely different credit card episode. But the big point is a lot of people get stuck because they put an emergency expense on a credit card and then they're paying 25-30% of that in interest for the next 6 months to a year. And so the big point is making sure you have that savings already. So if and when emergency comes, you have a backup plan. You don't have to pay any interest, because those credit cards for emergencies, that is a debt trap right there.
You definitely want to avoid, like even just take an example, like the ER visit I had was $600. And if there's 30% on top of that per month, you're looking at $20, but that's going to add up pretty fast. Over the course of 10 months, that's $200, right? Mm-hmm. So you're looking at more of an $800 bill. And so it's definitely something to keep in mind that credit cards are not used for emergency. They're used to help enjoy things and use your points like hotels, like Josh is saying. And when we develop an emergency fund, we want to make sure that we have a certain time frame of how many months should we actually save, right? Some of the research shows to save for around 3 months to 6 months for an emergency fund. And so if you're looking at, you have fixed expenses that are $4,000 a month, this is going to add up to about $12,000 a month for 3 months. It's going to add up to about $24,000 for 6 months. And again, this is specifically focused on your fixed costs. We're not talking about our long-term, short-term investment money or our guilt-free spending money. Like these are all off the table right now. And so we want to just make sure to highlight that it's very important that the emergency fund is all your fixed expenses. and making sure that you have a good 3 to 6 months saved up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can get confused and think, oh, my emergency fund should include all of my eating out and all of my fun expenses. And while you're building your emergency fund, you can still do some of those things. And for clarity, you can look back at our budgeting episode where we explain all of that. The question that people often ask too is, how big should my emergency fund be? And Devin said, if you're, for example, self-employed or you have a very inconsistent income, these are the types of people we would recommend having closer to a 6-month emergency fund instead of a 3. Now, another thing to note, if you're still paying off debt, start smaller. Build up 1 month of expenses while you're first tackling that debt. And the whole point of that is that this should basically light a fire in you to be more aggressive. We don't want you to be super comfortable initially when you're tackling your debt. You should be a little bit uncomfortable as far as how much you have saved, because again, that's your catalyst with being aggressive and taking down the debt quickly. Now, when you have significantly more money than 1 month's expenses, but you're still paying off non-mortgage debt, and when we talk about debt at Fiscal Clinician, we're talking about everything but your mortgage, because that is a bit of a different type of debt. We would encourage you to throw the rest of that money that's over 1 month's savings towards paying down the debt. And so a simple way to make this happen is by automating it. Treat your emergency fund like a monthly bill you owe yourself, and you're slowly adding up a little bit at a time each month. And if you can, set up an automatic transfer every paycheck. And it could be $100, $200 for a start. But the big thing is that you're starting to pull money automatically from your checking account into a savings account.
Yeah, so to reiterate what Josh said, automation is extremely important, and we both believe automation is a huge way to help remove your emotions from these decisions. And so if you're automating this money into a separate account, this is already starting to establish a good behavior, and you don't have to think about the money or talk yourself out of saving this money. It just simply happens.
Yeah, I'm convinced that automation is such a huge way to build wealth, whether it's investments, saving for like a car or a house. And if you're listening and thinking, oh my gosh, guys, I only have $1,000, I don't have $500 saved, guys, do not stress. You are not alone. And a lot of people start here, especially when we're working one-on-one with people. Often people don't have any savings. And so focus on a starter emergency fund first. Just hit that first $500 to $1,000. And $1,000 alone can turn a full-blown crisis into a more manageable inconvenience.
Yeah, exactly. The key is to start small and stay consistent. You don't need a perfect plan right now. You just need momentum. The moment you start getting money in there and you see that money coming into your account, you're going to feel good that you've actually established a good behavior. But let's talk about, where should we actually keep this emergency fund? So if you're still paying off debt, make sure your emergency fund is 100% liquid, meaning very easy to access. So keeping this in a separate savings account and not your checking account, it will allow you to easily access it. It can also grow for you a little bit as well. If you're debt free, you can move your emergency fund into a high yield savings account or a money market fund. And these funds actually will grow at 3.5 to 4%. And that just depends on the market at the time. But again, it's actually making some extra additional savings for you each month. So we always want to make sure that the emergency fund is in a separate account and easily accessible for these unexpected life situations.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think it's important to note that this emergency fund, the point is not an investment. So we're not trying to make a bunch of money on this like an index fund at 8 to 12%. But the point is security and liquidity, right? Being able to access it in these moments. But if we're fully paid off with our debt and we could make a few percent, then that's great. And what we can do, we'll spell out a couple places to look into high yield savings accounts and money markets. We're not sponsored by any of these, but these are personally some we've looked into that specifically don't have any transaction fees. So you can deposit and withdraw without any fees. And then there's not minimums with any of these either. So you don't have to have $50,000 or something like that in order to earn the interest rate. So you do want to read those. There's kind of a lot of glitches on some of them. These are pretty good though. The first one is Basque Bank. The second one is Valley Direct Bank, and the third one is UFB Direct. Now, again, that's at the time of this recording that we talked about the percentages and we talked about those rules. They change consistently, right? So we very much so encourage you to be diligent, look into all the rules and regulations on these before signing up for an account. The big thing about the high yield savings accounts is that they are FDIC insured up to $250,000. What this means is if the bank fails, your money is still protected by the federal government. So for some reason, if the bank shut down, you'd still get your money. Now, if you prefer investment firms, you can also look into Vanguard or Fidelity and their money market accounts. The insurance is a little bit different. It's called SIPC insured. And usually this goes up to around $250,000 to $500,000. It's specific to a brokerage instead of a bank. So just look into the difference. Either way, though, for the SIPC insurance, that protects you if the brokerage itself shuts down. Now, one important thing to note, it does not protect you against market losses, but against company failure. What that means is the high yield savings accounts could be a little more conservative because you won't lose any money on those. And for money markets, you will very rarely lose money. For example, I personally have our emergency fund in a Vanguard money market account. And in the last 50 years, it's never lost money. So it's a tiny bit more risky, but again, very rare to ever lose money on those. But again, do your own research and look into different options. The whole reason I used Vanguard and we continually use it is because I already have an IRA through Vanguard, and we also have a savings account, another money market account for our saving for a car. And so we're like, you know what, we might as well just put it in Vanguard since we already have accounts there. And that'll vary per person. Some people like to open a separate account completely as a high yield savings account. If you have investments already in Fidelity and Vanguard, it might make sense to you to do a money market.
Yeah, I really like Vanguard. I use UFB for my high yield savings account. I like them a lot. They're super secure. They ask a bunch of questions and making sure that you're the right person in that account. So it's very safe, very low risk, and will basically earn you a 3.54%. So to wrap up this episode, we're going to just kind of recap what is an emergency fund. An emergency fund is used for something unexpected, it's unavoidable, and it's urgent. And the biggest thing is just start with developing a plan. And that includes developing an emergency fund in your plan. And this will always provide you with a peace of mind, some flexibility, and some confidence. And the best place to park the money for an emergency fund is a savings account, not your checking account. And everyone's going to have to start somewhere. But I always believe in the quote, if you're going to change the world, you must start with one step. And no matter how hard that first step is, it's going to be the hardest of all. But if you start with the goal of saving, let's say $100 per month with the end goal in mind of saving $1,000, this will be a great start of transforming your money habits and behaviors and start to propel you towards financial freedom.
Yeah, well said. And again, if you don't have one, just start. The quote that you used reminded me of the quote you'll often hear in investing. And they'll ask, when was the best time to start investing? And they'll say, yesterday. And it's okay. When's the next best time? Today. So start today, start making some kind of move, even if it's a small one, and working towards at least $1,000 or a month worth of emergency fund can make a massive difference in both your financial security and just your peace and being able to sleep well at night. And so reminder, guys, Devin and I love working with people on their money plans, and just helping people succeed. So if you're in healthcare or really any other profession and you want some help walking through your money, go to fiscalclinician.com, book a free session there today, and then you can figure out if one-on-one coaching could be right for you. You can also find us at Fiscal Clinician on our TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube channels. And Devin, where can our listeners specifically find your channel?
Yeah, so you can find me at Health and Wealth Hawaii Instagram, at Health and Wealth Hawaii YouTube channel. And if you have a success story to share about paying off your debt, or even a struggle story on how you're entrenched in debt and need help, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories. We want to start sharing people's stories so everyone can be in the same boat and on this journey together.
Love it. All right, that's it for today's episode of the Fiscal Clinician Podcast. Be sure to just subscribe and like our episode, share with a clinician or a friend who needs it. And we're so excited to catch you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.